Slice.
Kank. Well, hello.
Well, hello.
Well, hello. Welcome back
Hello.
to the.
Hello.
We got some angling going on. Hello,
Hello.
sir.
My angle of my
Looking good. Looking good, sir. Let me do the intros. Well, hello. Welcome back to the Pencil to Pencil podcast, your favorite pandemic podcast, coming to you. Where Mike? Where did Mike go? Mike just. We're live, you guys. Well, I'll finish my intros. Your favorite pandemic podcast that comes to you live kind of every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. Oh, there you go, Mike. Where
Comcast.
Comcast, where I will kind of explain what this is, and then I'll introduce my lovely co-host. This fine live stream / podcast is, as we've said, is a sister project of Mike Manley's Draw ! Magazine. Mike, when did Draw start?
2000.
What?
99, I think. Yeah, I had the idea and I kicked it around. And I was in a chat room with a bunch of people at the time, and they said, "Oh, you should talk to that guy that does the Kirby collector." And so yeah, I talked to John, and then within a period of right away, it started right up. So
wow, that's fantastic.
I have an annual out. I hope sometime this year.
That's fantastic, and I hope that I'll be part of it. As a lot of people know, Mike has been doing Draw Magazine for some time. I came in at some point as a columnist and a writer occasionally in the new Krusty Critic. And I'm saying new because Andy Parks was the first Krusty Critic. Isn't that correct, Mike?
Yep. Andy was the first Krusty Critic.
I come from a long line of crusts. So I'm very excited to put that in because there's a little corollary between Andy and our guest tonight. So my name is Jamar Nicholas. I am a cartoonist as well. I have a book series at Scholastic Graphics called, the first book is called Leon the Extraordinary, which will be in stores in October of this year. I am joined at the proverbial hip by my best bud and Master Chief of Comic Illustration, Michael Manley. How are you, Mike? That was really on point, wasn't it?
Oh, okay. Today was a big finishing up. It's like, those old Spider-Mans where you're constantly swinging. Buildings are a million miles away. Well, that's how it was in the studio today. So finished 1 week of one strip and another week of the other strip, and then started on the next week of both strips.
So for any of our new viewers who are watching tonight, because as I like to say, we get a lot of new eyeballs from people who follow the slipstream in of our guests from time to time, is Mike Manley. Beyond having a prolific career in comic books and also in animation, Mike is currently doing 2 legacy comic strips at the same time, Judge Parker and the Phantom. Yes, that Phantom. I don't know how you do it, bro. We say that.
He's 85. He just turned, I think this week was the 85th anniversary of the strip.
That's ridiculous. Yeah. So hold on. We're not going to really take questions, but JRD asks a good question. One of our lifers and regulars and part of the JNN network, our good buddy Notorious JRD, asks, Mike, you work on stories weeks in advance, but do you have a specific schedule, or do you just work?
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, ideally in the old days, they wanted you to be 12 weeks. 13 weeks. The average length of a newspaper strip, as I've come to understand the story, I should say, was 12 or 13 weeks, like a couple months. But now, with technology, sometimes I burned the candle down quite a bit. So I'm trying to gain some time. But ideally, they would like you to be 4 weeks ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It depends upon the strip. It's hard on this strip. In fact, I read an interview with Cy Berry, the great Cy Berry, and he always fought the deadlines too, because this is a difficult strip to do.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult script to do. This week, I was drawing a flashback, and I'm drawing like, old Chinese or old Tibetan cities, guys wearing like World War I era uniforms and horses and specific kinds of guns, and it's in Tibet, so you have to do research on, like, every day. There was a lot of this whole week, these last couple of weeks, the storyline, in fact, has a lot of research. So some, it's not like Marvel Comics where you get to sort of like make it all up.
Yeah.
When you draw a gun, you have to draw like a real gun, and then, if you're trying to draw a real gun, you got to draw the gun from
right
angles. So
you can't just draw a toaster with a pistol grip.
There are guys who draw guns that are like the sort of generic block 45 or 38, but the Phantom has very specific guns.
Very specific.
And the Phantom has very specific fans. So if you draw something that's not like Manley slipping, I don't know if that was the Black Hawk helicopter. I don't think that one was built until blah 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 blah. They have I call them sort of like the statisticians, like off on the side, going like, okay, you got that gun right. Fingernail missing, that finger's small, but
we got the green visor on, and
they're
pulling
like
the crank. Man was slipping.
And some of these people, they've been reading the script for literally for decades.
Yeah.
So, I've been drawing it 6 years. So
that's wild. You know what else is wild, Mike Manley? Our sponsors.
Are they wild?
Wild and crazy. If you've followed along with us over the past couple of years, you know about the John, very Philadelphian over here. See the John above my head? That is our first sponsor, the good people at Graphicsly who make Clip Studio Paint. Yes, that Clip Studio Paint.
The one that I was just using.
Yeah, the one that a lot of cartoonists have just put into their, as they call it nowadays, Mike, your daily driver.
Daily. Where's my driver? Where's my driving Miss Daily driver? I want Morgan Freeman to come in here. My background.
And also our good buddy John Morrow, who is the publisher at Tomorrow's Publishing, who publishes Draw Magazine and other fine periodicals. So, Mike, I'm going to take the stuff off the screen, and I want to bring in our guest. Would you like to tell the people about Phil?
Phil's like one of those guys that great multi-talent, writing, drawing, laying out. He, much like his often partner in crime, Andy Parks, there are these like nice Midwestern guys. You just as soon as you meet them, you're like, oh, those guys they're so nice. There's just now maybe there's a silo behind his house with bodies. I don't know, but no, Phil is awesome. Got to know him when I got to know Andy. When I started publishing my Action Planet stuff, he was working with Andy when Andy was publishing his first self-published comic, the Fire Dog, Uncle Slam and Fire Dog.
Uncle Slam and Fire Dog. Right?
And then Phil was doing the WRETCH, but Phil had been doing
the WRETCH for a
lot of stuff for a long time. He was like the Midwestern triple threat.
Oh, I like that. And that was I don't know if you just said it, Mike, but that was during your self-publishing run at Action Planet, right? Did we mention that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was after, I guess I started thinking about it right when I left Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And I had made those good royalty things. So I was thinking, like, maybe I should try to start self-publishing. So I did, and I got a couple issues out, and I made no money, but then it led to other things. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes when you do something, it may not be initially be a success,
Mm-hmm.
but actually from doing that, it led to working in animation. It led to Draw Magazine. So, you know, sometimes, you know, your initial project might not be, you know, a grand slam home run, but, you know, you may drive a few runs in.
I love it. All right. Well, before he eats all the Chex Mix in the green room, let's bring in our guest for this evening, our good buddy Phil Hester. Woo, bring him in.
Chang, 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 render, render.
Jeez. Wow.
Look at that.
You have effects.
Yeah, we spared no expense. That's right. Welcome to the podcast, Phil.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much. You know, there's a lot of love in the building tonight, so I want you to be as comfortable as you can. Take your socks off. You know, we can't see what's going on underneath your torso. So
There's nothing on this.
nothing going on.
Just pipes.
My Tupperware.
I love it. Oh, look, and there's a special check-in from Andy. Hey, Andy, good to see you, bro.
He's looking kind of tough there.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hard-boiled crime fiction writer.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, Mike, why don't you get the grilling started, and I'll check in with the chat room.
So I'm trying to think. Didn't I met you in a Chicago con, right? Didn't we?
Probably, because that was sort of the Chicago cons were sort of like, I would do that thing where I would schlep my portfolio to that terrarium they had by the pool, and it was just full of people like me, you know, young wannabe creators, and believe it or not, editors used to just sit behind a table and review portfolios.
What?
Yes. And I spent the entire con in that room. You know, I wouldn't go to panels, or, you know, I just spent, you know, the whole day getting my teeth kicked in by editors. And I wish that was still around, because that was a great training ground. But yeah, I'm sure we probably ran into each other at Chicago Con.
I think I ran into you, and I ran into Andy, and wasn't Flint Henry there when we were like sitting?
It's possible, yeah.
I seem to remember that, and it was not long after that Andy moved to Philly.
Right. And then we became buddies after he moved to Philly, and then I would make trips out there to visit him and hang out with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah. But now, so that was around 92, 93?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably around that time.
Yeah.
Because
that wasn't your first. What was your first Chicago con? Were you like, you know, a teenager?
No, I think I was in college though, and I think we put like 8 guys in a 4-door, and, like, you know, all stayed in the same disgusting hotel room, and but I can't tell you the year, but it was like probably late 80s. And
you were still in high school, or you were in
college? No, I was in college at that point. And I started going to them as a pro, like, you know, probably around 1990, you know, because I was lucky to get in on the black and white explosion of the late 80s, you know, and the bar to become there we go.
Oh, look at Andy.
He knows. So the bar to become a professional at that point in comics history was pretty low, and I could sort of limp over it. And so I started working in comics, like, I think between my sophomore and junior years of college. And I put working and comics both in quotes there, because they were very like kind of fly by night operations. But to a college sophomore, it felt like the big time, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it was
just draw.
Yeah.
That was the big thing, you know?
Yeah, because my, besides going to school, my day job was like being a waiter at the student union. So it was like getting paid $35 a page seemed incredible. I mean, when you got it.
Yeah.
Right.
And you got the logo on your check. Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, that was like, I felt like I was in, and yeah, it's sort of like, I got married very young, and I'm still married to my wonderful wife. And it seemed like my professional career coincided with my marriage. Like they both took place about the same year, and they've sort of been growing since.
So did you get married and go, did you get the job and like, no, I can afford to marry you?
No.
Cigar band around the finger. Right?
Now I can turn in my pitchfork and pick up the pencil. No, it was, she was like, I've been really lucky. Like I have a really great support system my whole life. My parents were very supportive of me doing this, and my wife has been as well. So but I'm glad that I started getting paying work right away and didn't have to go through like a lot of years of like, bear with me, honey, this is going to pay off someday.
Just pages, sample pages piling up. Where are you going? Post office. Send me out more samples.
Yeah, I was on a pretty strict regimen then of doing new samples every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do them for each publisher. So I would I would do DC samples and Marvel samples and like First samples, Kamiko. Like I went down the list and would do, pitch like samples for like each publisher. I was really serious about it. Like I would go to the comic shop, and like every time I saw a new comic, I would buy it just so I could go home and like copy the indicia, and I would submit like right away.
Yeah. I talk a lot about things like that, Phil, with a lot of our guests, and just a lot of our shared origin stories have a lot to do with hustle or grit, or however you want to call that thing, that I don't necessarily want to say it's missing with a lot of young people these days, but you just did a lot of extra things to get where you needed versus I guess how it works now.
And also in my case, there was ignorance, because you just sort of thought, oh, this is how it happens. Well, I mean, if I rewind it back to high school, I just thought I'll send in some X-Men pages and, I'll be on X-Men next month.
Hello, it's PHIL HESTER.
I love the Stan. I love the Stan voice.
And then, but like, thankfully, like back then, like Elliot Brown would write you back, and Jim Shooter even would write you back, and they would give you constructive criticism. And I took it to heart. And then I just sort of transferred that practice of like always submitting new work to smaller and smaller publishers until there were some that were desperate enough to hire me.
So what was your first gig then?
I worked for Silver Wolf Comics.
Wow.
Okay. I don't know.
Which is known as the home of, it's where Tim Vigil got his start.
Oh, okay.
And it's where Ron Lim got his start as well. Mm-hmm. And I think Brandon McKinney did too. But we were all sort of babies there.
And what was the story?
You'll never know. I'll never divulge it.
I'll never tell.
Is it out there? If I dig through enough quarter boxes, will I find it?
Yeah, probably. No, although they went out of business. This is shocking, I know, but they went out of business owing me a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
What?
And yes, and I took payment in backstock.
Yeah. So
it's like, just send me as many of my books as you still have, and they all got recycled. So.
Hey, Phil, before we get too deep into it, there's some tribute to you. People are paying tribute to you in the chat.
I'm not in the chat. I'm in the private side of the chat.
So. That's right. Good. Well, I'll relay. I'm a big fan of giving people their roses, as they call it these days. So it's always great to see things like this. Our buddy D. Brad says, I will always remember Phil's warmth at my very first con. My wife told him it was my first con, and he eased my nervousness. It sounded like you like brushed his hair or something like
that.
It told me what to it told me what to expect and drew me a free picture of Green Arrow. Thank you, Phil.
Well, you're welcome. It's like I took his maidenhead. Yeah.
It's like Green Arrow. There you go.
There it is. it's okay. Yeah, it's like I try. Yeah, it was probably like giving him like one of my sketches gave him great expectations when he went out in the world, and like every other sketch he got after that was so much better. He was like, wow.
Is this what it could have been? One other one, our good buddy Notorious JRD says, I don't have a question, but a thanks. I've been out of comics for a long while, and after college and marriage, I jumped back in, and it was Phil's art that was a big draw. So thank you, Phil Hester.
I can only apologize so many times.
Okay, continue, you guys.
But thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm glad.
So now when you got that stuff, did you send that stuff, or were you
no.
like, to Marvel, you give them Spider-Man or Cap or whatever, and DC Man, and
sort of by that time I had work coming out, I was sort of at a like I'm not very objective about the quality of my work, but it was in a very steep incline at that time. Like everybody's biggest growth spurt is like from page 0 to page 100 of their career. And by the time I was getting stuff into print, by the time it got into print, it was nowhere near as good as what I could do. So I was always doing new samples, even after I was in print other places. I never showed anybody published work. I was always bringing in new material to show editors. Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to point out, because one of the things about breaking into comics, the Pangea that we came from, where we always talk about where you had the editors would actually look at your stuff, reply to you and say yes, no. Sometimes you'd get a little, like my first samples I sent to Cumley Comics, the Captain Canuck.
Oh yeah.
George Freeman and Jean-Claude Saint-Laurent actually drew over my stuff, right, and sent it back to me. That just doesn't happen now because you're not sending your samples. I mean, they used to have, I don't know if you were ever in Marvel, there was a room where they had all that stuff, and it was just a ginormous pile of submissions.
It was probably 20% my crap.
But but now you can email somebody.
Yeah.
And you can get feedback like right away.
Yeah. I don't know if you get this since it's not in person. I don't think you get the same level of feedback that you got back then. Like you were saying, like Mike Carlin would show up in that little terrarium with a ream of tracing paper. And even though Mike wasn't an artist, he would still go over, he'd put it right on your portfolio and show you where you're going wrong. And that sort of experience is invaluable, and we'll probably never get back there. But the flip side of that is, if you admire an artist now and you follow them on social media, you can just drop them a line and say, hey, will you take a look at my stuff? And even though editors are less responsive, I think artists are more responsive now than they were.
Yeah.
And so, you can sort of narrowcast your, I don't want to say your samples, but just your work in general to artists you admire and see what they think about it. And so in that way, it's a better landscape now. Also in terms of just getting your work out there, it's a better landscape now. Not in terms of getting paid for it, but in terms of getting eyeballs on it, it's better now than it was then.
Oh yeah, because when you were 15 years old, if you had taken your samples and wanted to put it online, that didn't exist.
No. We were like, I was making mini comics when I was 15. Like I was stealing time on the school's copier and, running off the new issue of Captain Squatty Body or whatever I was working on,
Now, did you have a specific, like, okay, I want to draw Daredevil or I want to draw Iron Man, or was there like a specific?
No, I wanted to do anything. Like I think that's one of the blessings of being a young cartoonist is like, you can get into any assignment because you're just happy to be there. So like if you get something that's very far, like one of the first assignments I got at DC was Black Orchid, and Black Orchid is not really in my wheelhouse. I'm not a good girl artist. And that's post Dave McKean doing Black Orchid. So the bar is really high on that book. but I didn't care because I was working. I was just excited to be there, and that's something that's about the only thing I miss about being a young artist, was that sort of gusto you had for every project, just because it was novel.
Right. So now, I'm always interested in guys like us who are basically autodidacts. Like, what was your training routine? Like, some people, like, you sort of would stumble on like something in an old fanzine where a guy would say, I always use a flare, blah, blah. That's it. That's the thing, right?
Yeah. No, I would eat up anything I could get like that, any information that could come my way like that. And when I was in high school, the comics press as it is did not exist at all. There was, I guess, the Comics Journal Buyer's Guide existed and the Comics Journal existed, but those were not easy to access. But my school did have a copy of Steranko's history.
Okay.
And it was never in the library. It was always in my locker. And it was, I took that. Yes. And I took that as sort of like a manual. It doesn't have a ton of technical information in it, but it had a lot about the lifestyle of being a creator. And to me, that was gold. And I just absorbed all that stuff. And it sort of informed, like, at least the work ethic that I approach comics with, that all these golden age stories of these hard scrabble, Jack Kirby, like literally like crawling out of the ghetto with pencils for, crampons, just sailing out of the ghetto. And like all those stories really resonated with me. And I was like, I made like my friend group into like a little comics company. I was like, we're going to publish this comic this week and this comics next month. And we had different genres represented and different titles. And, it was a very small high school. So I really only had like 3 or 4 friends that were into it. But we acted like we had a little publisher. And that was really great training for when real publishers started to pay attention to me, because I already sort of had that sort of infrastructure of like the life of an artist built into me.
Now, are any of your friends actually in the business now, or?
No, which is kind of startling to me, because I felt like at the time I was in the middle of the pack of those friends in terms of skill. But you have to also have a certain kind of ego to put up with a lot of rejection, and
there's a lot of head nodding going.
Yeah, on. And it's like, and it can hurt. And like I took my friends to that. I keep calling it the terrarium. It's like the solarium next to the pool at the Ramada. And
it smells like chlorine while you're getting your paint.
Yes. So anybody that's been in that room knows about it. But my high school friends came with me to that first one, and they got their teeth kicked in just like I did, and they closed their portfolios forever, and they were done. Yeah. And I instead I took notes. I was like, okay, this is gold. This is more for me to learn. And I don't blame them for that, because it's like, I'm not exactly sure it's like a healthy life path to like pursue cartooning, but it's been very rewarding for me, and I'm glad I stuck with it.
It's funny you were talking about this, because I think it was yesterday or day before I was commenting on a thread on Facebook. It was either Jim Ingle or Hillary Barta, and somebody had brought up like, well, what was the most important thing? And I think now, and especially after having taught, and I look back over my career, the most important thing to have is the right type of personality. Because it leads to everything else. It leads to you being kicked in the face and going home and coming back and getting kicked in the face and going. And most people can get kicked once or twice, and then it's like, nah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're like lifers, though. We like, if someone's not kicking us in the face, we're like, what's wrong?
Yeah. And I really, because you can see a student in 10th grade or 9th grade or 10th grade, and they have the ability, but they don't have the personality, or they get interested in something else.
Right.
And then there's that one weird kid that's sitting in the back of the class that has a portfolio full of all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the same thing over again, like I'm just going to draw Deadpool's face, you know?
Right.
That's the person that has a chance if they have the right kind of personality.
Right. And to get back to your initial question about like what kind of training I had. So I took all my comics training from, just doing those samples over and over again. And then like not necessarily copying from books I enjoyed, but like definitely studying what made those books different from other books. And then I did go to college and get a BFA, but that was largely a process of trying to like beat those comics habits out of me as a fine artist. Because at that time, there's like in the 80s, there was no like fine arts and comics did not like Raw was just starting. So like only the very hippest professors were into that. But so it was, and I'm glad that was beaten out of me because it really expanded my horizons as to what kind of artist I wanted to be. I went into art school thinking Frank Frazetta was the greatest painter that ever lived. And, I came out of it thinking it was Mark Rothko, so like definitely a 180, but yeah. I'm glad those horizons got expanded for me because I don't know if I'd have been ready to see somebody like Dave McKean come along or George Pratt unless I had been in art school and exposed to that broader world of art.
Phil, I hate to jump ahead because I know we're going to get to this, but good question just jumped into the chat from our good buddy Matt Waringo of the Waringo Dynasty. Matt says, I'm looking at your copy of The Coffin right now, or his copy of The Coffin. Your origin story is about your drawing, but how'd you get into the writing side? Thanks, Matt. Good question.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'd always been writing. We'll go back to high school and our little fake comic company. Everybody had to do everything. Everybody penciled, everybody wrote, everybody colored, everybody lettered. So I had always been writing. It's just that my skills as an artist sort of were ready for market first. And so I would, like I said, the bar was really low back then. So like artist, you could get hired as an artist, earlier in my career. So it's just that I got on that track and got known as an artist to most people. And I sort of had to, make an effort to go back to writing and write some stuff that I didn't draw. Because I think even, like when I was doing stuff like the WRETCH, that was stuff I was writing and drawing. Mm-hmm. So people, would say, oh, he's a cartoonist and not he's a writer.
Right.
And I was lucky to meet Mike Huddleston I met Mike Huddleston and Jim Mahfood when they were like 13 or 14.
That's crazy.
And I was like 22.
Yeah.
So like we were all babies. But I could tell right then they were like super talented. And so I was looking for ways to work with those guys. And then when Mike was in his mid-20s, we wound up connecting on The Coffin, and it was a great experience for all of us. And people still talk about that book, and movie studios still call us about that book, and it was really rewarding. And we still consider each other collaborators and partners, and hope to get back to doing something together again soon.
Cool.
But yeah, that's sort of
that's good because I also think that 4 or 5 years earlier, it wouldn't have been as easier to be a writer. You're usually specialized, like you're a writer, you're a penciler, you're an inker, and the company's kind of like, if you did that, they wanted to kind of keep you in that slot.
Yeah, and I think those slots still exist for me in my career. I'm just lucky that different editors see me as different aspects of that, and different publishers see me in different ways. Like if you ask Oni, they would tell you I'm a writer. Mm-hmm. And if you asked DC, they would tell you I'm an artist for the most part. Even though I've done a lot of writing at DC lately, but it's just sort of, and it's almost like it's atomized down to, it's like an editor by editor. Like some editors want you for art and some want you to, write. And the most embarrassing thing on earth is for when an editor contacts you and you assume it's for one thing and not the other. You know, where you're like, yes, you're finally ready to let me write Daredevil. And it was like, oh, we wanted you to do 4 pages because we wanted you to pencil 4 pages. So yeah.
Well, Phil, to that point, which I think is interesting, because I know we all know a lot of people in the business who kind of got shoehorned into one thing when they had other things going on, or maybe they started in as an inker, but they really want to direct. And a lot of people just can't get out of that lane. Did you find that you had some maybe problems in your mid-career trying to steer the car in another direction?
No, I was fortunate to get again there because I was getting enough work as an artist that I could take chances as a writer. So I was lucky that like in my mid-20s, I already had like a regular monthly book. I was drawing Swamp Thing. And that let me sort of build up a war chest and take some chances, you know, and go write indie books and not have to worry about them making money. So like I could say, like, if this book makes any money or if there's any advance at all, that can all go to the art team. And being a successful artist let me take chances as a writer. So those two things were like integral.
Oh, cool. Thank you. It's a great answer. There's so many questions going on. All right, I'm going to jump in here, if you don't mind, Phil, and throw some questions at you. JRD asks, when you write specifically for another artist whom you may not know, do you add thumbnails for difficult pages, or do you leave it all up to the artist?
I do. I love the way I'm in love with the way Harvey Kurtzman used to write those war comics for EC, which I thought that was like probably the greatest job in the universe, to like, you know, noodle up these great short stories, sketch them out, and then hand them off to the greatest artist who ever lived. You know, well, that's not like the best job. And I was really in love with that way of working. And I do that for the artists that are open to it. But I always check with the artist first and make sure that's something they're into or want, because I don't want to step on their toes as a storyteller. I want to respect, you know, their idea of the way to approach the story. And also I don't want to like quash anything they might bring to the story by working on it and thinking about it as an artist. But when an artist is open to that, I love to do that. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. And in fact, for a little while, I'd say probably 2 or 3 years ago, like every assignment I had for DC was translating scripts into thumbnails for other artists who were either too slow to keep up with the storytelling or weren't quite, you know, well versed enough in the storytelling. And so they sort of brought me into, like, I think Larry Hama does that sometimes too, sort of like thumbnail books for other artists, just so to kind of nail the storytelling down. And to me, that's really satisfying and fun. And I'd love to do that when I write, but I always do that with a caveat that the artist is free to like change things and move things around. But I do find when I thumbnail things like that, it really helps me think about the timing and balloon placements, which are things most writers don't think about, especially balloon placements.
Right.
But those are, I mean, balloon placement is one of the most important things in comics, and people rarely think about it. And I think a writer should think about it. So even if you can't draw, you should take one of your scripts and make little Matt Feasel, you know, stick figures out of them, just to learn how a page is built and to see how it kind of falls into place. And it'll definitely change the way you think about writing.
Yeah. When I teach my class with a high school class, when I teach comics, that's what I would have people. I would give them and have my level paper, and I would just tell them, draw a grid, like 6 panels, and you can draw literally just a stick figure or a scribble. And that's the city. Just so you see how the real estate has to be shared, how you put the pieces on the piece of paper.
Yeah, it's really important.
The thing that shoots most amateurs down is they got like, I really like this part, and I really want to draw this thing, and there's this thing, oh, I know I want to draw, and then like all the connective tissue.
Yeah.
I don't really know what goes on here.
Yeah.
You have all these holes in your story. And so I said, like, write your story now.
Yeah.
And it can be like, it looks like a little kid drew it, you know? just so you know what the story is. And then once you have your story, then you know what you have to draw. If you have to have reference, you want to draw your characters, whatever. I mean, you can break that panel into 2 panels, however, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of success getting little kids to do whole series that way.
Yeah, they can't wait. And now that they've seen like Dogman, they realize like the bar of draftsmanship doesn't necessarily have to be very high to be an effective storyteller. And it's kind of I think it's blowing all these imaginations wide open to like just do it. I mean, that's the thing I always tell young creators, whether it's like a third grader or a 30-year-old, is that like, don't say you want to be a cartoonist, just be a cartoonist. Just do it.
Ooh, I love it.
That's going to teach you more than anything, just starting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that exercise is especially important that we're talking about for writers. It's especially important for them to start thinking about the comics medium, because I worked with a lot of like screenwriters and novel writers that weren't hip to that, and they needed that crash course badly. And thankfully, growing up in comics, you know, learning on the fly has sort of like built that sort of language into me. So when it did come time for me to write, I already knew, like what you said, how much real estate this is going to cost me, where the page turns are, you know, all that sort of thing was already in me.
There's a great follow-up question from our buddy D. Brad, and there's some other people in here, I promise. D. Brad says, I want to know about the process of adapting a screenplay to a comic. Wasn't Bionic Man an adaptation of a Kevin Smith screenplay?
Yeah, it was a really daunting exercise because Kevin's screenplays are really dense. They're very dialogue heavy and dense. And so I also did that with the Green Hornet book we did together. That was a screenplay that I adapted as well. And then also I thumbnailed that out for Jonathan Lau to pencil from. So that was sort of like, you know, those two worlds colliding, you know. And but it took me a long time to really just budget it, you know, to read that screenplay and kind of go through and say, well, this is a page, this is half a page, you know, just go through and like really break it down and cut it so where it fit 10 issues. But I have to say it was a fun exercise because that's the sort of thing I was born to do. You know, like I'm not really like the greatest renderer in the history of comics. But like I think about story like at a pretty good level. And so taking that screenplay and turning it into a comic was like really rewarding for me. And I learned a lot from that too.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I had a project a couple of years ago where I had to adapt a prose book, and it's a lot harder than people think it is. You know, so that's almost kind of like when people have this assumption that doing kind of like a stage play or a screenplay is the same as writing a comic book script. It's very close, but it's not. It's like wearing, I don't know, a tennis shoe and a running shoe on the other foot. It's like they're both sneakers, but it's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, for a concrete example, there's a scene in the Green Hornet comic, the Green Hornet screenplay that I adapted to comics, where there's a scene where a guided missile is chasing the Black Beauty, you know, down some alleys, and the car's trying to outrun this guided missile. And in Kevin's screenplay, it's like a paragraph. And I was like, looking at him like, this is 6 pages, you know, and I don't think you're ready. I don't think you're ready to hear that. But this is like, you know, a third of an issue we're going to have to spend on this car chase. And that's just sort of the thing that like a lifetime in comics teaches you to recognize.
Yeah, because each medium has certain requirements.
Yeah.
Right? So you can take something that's in a comic and put it into animation. And it still is going to, there's going to be things that you have to change because of the medium of animation.
Yes.
Well, comics is the most condensed. And then like comic strips is the most condensed version of comic book, right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people think TV, they think movie. A lot of writers think movie. They think that when they're looking at it, they're writing that in their head, they're kind of thinking of live action and they're thinking of the people and they're cutting. And then you have to put it down on paper and go like, wow, okay, here's 6 pages of just people's heads talking. That's not.
They're not going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, how do you condense what is important? One of the things that you realize when you study the older stuff, those guys were the good guys like Archie and Stan were so good at giving you that little bit where the characters would have their interpersonal relationship without sacrificing the momentum of the overall issue and then leading you to the cliffhanger. It's harder to do than you think it is.
Yeah, was it Chuck Dixon that said you can have anything happen, but there needs to be an explosion on page 3?
Yeah.
And not only that, but also on page 6, 9, and 12, you've got to give people something to look at. And I think this is a TV thing or a screenplay thing, but I think David Mamet said you can't just have people talking. They have to be doing something.
Right.
They have to be doing something while they're talking. And the cool thing about being a comic book artist is that thing does not have to be in the text. Like you can fish that out of a scene if it's not written. And I almost take that as a challenge when there's like a really boring stretch of talking heads, is to like go in there and find out, okay, what are the visual themes I can pick up out of here? What's going on in the background that can either like accentuate what's happening or sort of provide like a counterbeat to that, like that gives this scene a little more flavor. Like those are all things that like, if you're an engaged comic book artist, you can find. So there's like really no excuse to make a boring page. Like I don't care how boring your script is. If you're a good storyteller, if you're a good director, you'll find an angle and make that page engaging one way or another. Even if it's like even if you've got to go Eisner and like make the act of storytelling the star of that moment, then you do that. But you can't have a dead page. I mean, you can have pages that are rests, between notes, but you can't have pages that are just death.
Right. Well, you notice when you watch, especially like the old soap operas or old movies, there's this convention of I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, but I'm turned so you can see my face and your face.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't happen in real life.
No, never. But I draw it all the time.
Right. Right. There's all those tricks that people do, like I'm lighting a cigarette or I'm preparing a solution and you can see this in my face and your face, but somehow you're not noticing what I'm doing over here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff like that sort of feeds into your head depending upon what you're watching. And older stuff, like the older movies and the older TV shows, they had to be very clear, especially the old TV shows, because the screen is like this big.
Yeah.
The thing had to read they had to read, or else the audience would get lost.
And in comics, we're sort of in that same boat because people are moving along. They're not looking at your drawing forever. I mean, in some ways, if they are looking at your drawing forever, you kind of blew it a little bit. Like you need to be moving the story along. Of course, there's room for that really beautiful illustrative drawing. But if it doesn't function as a story delivery system, the beautiful drawing is just an impediment. So it's got to work on both levels.
Yeah. I think, there's like Prince Valiant, which is not, it was a comic strip, but it's not really a comic strip in the moment sequence. It's these beautiful illustrations that tell a story.
Yeah.
But and even Flash Gordon was like that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Kirby was more panel to panel, moment to moment.
Right.
Because people wanted to open up and see the spectacle and be able to look at it and enjoy it as a sort of merge of illustration and comics. So it was a very different. Also, because papers are big, they were huge, so you could do that.
And also, there were different expectations from the audience then, because comics were a baby medium, and the only person there were a handful of people like really playing with like Winsor McKay or George Harriman that were really playing with what a comic page can do or show you. And yeah, you're right. Those other books, beautiful, those other strips, beautiful as they are, were just illustrations, beautiful illustrations. But I mean, they do, and they still, like, no matter how like divorced from storytelling those illustrations might be, it's kind of funny how those pages still function as comics despite their intentions, because you see the whole thing at once and you get a vibe from the whole page at once. Even if, Hal Foster wasn't thinking that. Hal Foster was thinking like, check out this bridge, like I'm gonna draw the hell out of this horse. You still, as a reader, you still experience all those things at once. And so like the meta panel that Eisner talks about exists whether you want it to or not. So if it's there, why not take advantage of it, and why not exploit it and do fun things with your pages?
Yeah, and now there's no meta panels in comics.
Yeah, now there's guided view.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of meta, Phil just commented on himself. So
no, I didn't. That's my Facebook page.
That's crazy.
You're the T2000 Phil Hester.
That's my good young friend Austin Hamlin runs sort of like a fan page for me, because I won't go on Facebook.
That's fantastic. So, it's kind of like liquid Phil, like well, it goes through your head and it just like
Phil on Phil.
That's right.
So who would you say was the first artist then? It was the key. I know you were talking about Kurtzman, but was really key for you connecting the dots of the art and the story and the layout? Was it Eisner? Was it Steranko? Was it?
It was probably Frank Miller.
Miller, Daredevil?
Because his Daredevil came out when I was like 13. And that was like, I was helpless to resist. And also at that time is when my school got the Steranko history. And I don't know if you remember, but there's a whole Eisner story in the back of that. I can't remember what it's, Professor Paraffin or something, about the guy who, dissolves himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that whole thing there. And so like those two, and then there was also the Kitchen Sink Spirit magazine coming in. I started searching that out, but I quickly became although I never stopped loving Kirby and never will, or John Byrne or Joe Staton or guys like that, or Bernie Wrightson. I started moving away from like guys who draw cool and more towards artists who think about integrating story and art. And so that led me to like search out Toth and Bernie Kriegstein and all the EC guys.
You were looking at structure.
Yeah, because also like I didn't quite, still don't quite believe in my drawing ability. So I feel like I have to bring like something else to the, I'm like a slow wide receiver. My routes better be crisp, So that's like my storytelling is like my crisp routes. Because
but that's really important, because if you look at guys like, I always use a guy like Kubert. There was the early Kubert, and then there was the middle sort of tight Kubert, and then there was the looser and 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 the looser. But all the formal qualities of his art never lost a step.
No, he was.
And if your drawing is, your success is based upon your rendering, and as much as I love Russ Heath, at a certain point you get the old man drawing starts to kind of creep in. You just have that.
And you don't know when it's coming. Nobody does. And it could happen when you're 60. It could happen when you're 80, or maybe you'll be
60.
or maybe you'll be Joe Kubert or Walt Simonson and never lose a step. But it's kind of hard to spot in your own work. So like,
I look every day.
Or you could be like Chris Sprouse and like draw everything in reverse every day. So you just know.
Oh, my eyes! What's wrong with my eyes? No.
But I know what you're talking about, because like, you hit an age and like the figures start to slide off the page. They start flattening out in weird ways. Yeah. And the perspectives get odd. And that's just that could be something as fundamental as macular degeneration. You don't have any control over that. So being closer to Harvey Kurtzman than Bernie Wrightson is better for your long-term health, because your storytelling sense will always be there. And it's something that you can exploit even if you're not drawing. Like, so let's say my career turned into what I was doing for DC 3 years ago, which was boot camping other artists into becoming better storytellers. That's totally satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that is the most creative. I think the layout part is the most creative part. The drawing is the hard part. That's the, you know, and then the inking is the fun part.
Yeah, not for me.
No,
no, the inking is the. I just did a. I rarely ink my own work, and so like I was inking a Red Sonja cover for Dynamite the other day, and I was like, why is this cover taking a whole day to ink? It took me 45 minutes to pencil. You know, it was just like, this is brutal, because I just don't. Because I came up with Andy and we were sort of like joined at the hip.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had this. We're simpatico in that the way I move my pencil is the way he moves his pen and his brush. Like we move kind of slashing moves, but I don't have this facility with a pen or a brush to move a pen or a brush the way I move my pencil. Like I have to be more careful. I don't have a steady enough hand or I think even good enough eyesight to do that. So I usually like handing it off to other people is important for me. I just don't like, occasionally I'll ink something and I'm okay with, but it's usually something that's very rough hewn, you know, like I did a thing called Bone Shaker a long time ago. That was very it's very like Jose Munoz, like, and I'm comfortable inking that way, but I can never ink like Iron Man. You know, I'd be in trouble.
Hey, Phil,
Iron Man made out of rock.
Yes. What happened to Iron Man? He's Rust Man.
This might be a fantastic time to maybe share some images. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. And how are you doing, Phil?
Fine.
All right.
You thought I was gonna
get
rid of these dumb questions.
Yeah, no. Pull the ripcord. All right, you guys, I'm going to share some art that Phil was nice enough to share with us. And we have some production pieces, like some process work. So let me try to get that up on the screen. And Phil, if you want to kind of talk about what we're looking at.
Sure.
Oh, that's not what I wanted to show first. But we're here. We're here now. So let's.
I'll whatever you want.
Okay.
But this is a good example of, I think you have Andy's version of it too. But like, this is a good example of what I was talking about, where like, I'm comfortable moving my pencil in a very free flowing way and very gestural way, but I'm not comfortable inking that way. So like if I had to ink this, I would be so uptight about replicating what I could accomplish with my pencil that I would freeze up and not quite nail it. And I'm lucky that I could hand it off to somebody like Andy that can who knows what my intent is in my mark making and take it in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. So
it might be after. Yeah. Well, there's the colored one. Yeah. I think that's the only one. Yeah. So, and that's colored by D Cuniff. But yeah, Andy, like, he's hip to what I'm trying to do. And I'm lucky that I've had two like sort of main inkers that are both really like on the same page as I am in terms of our aesthetic, in Andy Parks and Eric Gapster. But yeah, I know I can hand stuff off to Andy and it'll come back looking the way it would look if I could ink.
Right. All right. Here's the beginning. This is what I wanted to start with. I wanted to start with this Batman page, and then.
This is like nobody's seen this yet. So this is like from that Valentine's Day story. That's going to be DC's Valentine's Day special. So spoilers if you don't want that story spoiled for yourself. But this is the last page of that, and you can sort of see where, like I'm not quite to Mignola level of seeing the black in my head, but pretty close. So like, to me, everything, is black and I carve white spaces out of it. But this is sort of an example of like me knowing that I can trust Andy to know, where I want black, where I want texture, where he can assert himself. Yeah, I know. That's Andy's last page. Sad. It's so sad.
I don't believe him.
Well, till his screenplay money runs out.
Till his bar tab comes due. Damn it.
But here's Andy's inked page, and you can see that, like, you know, we're on the same page, you know, in terms of everything. Like he knows what my shorthand is. We've got a lot of the same influences, so I'm never going to get anything back from him that is just like startlingly off base.
You guys are like the tag team champs.
And you guys have been working together, what, like 20 years?
Yeah, more than 20 years, yeah.
Yeah, so would you say that his inking has influenced your pencils?
I think only in terms of that we both are each other's safe spaces. So like I can be as kind of, you know, I hate to keep using the word slashy, but I can be as quick and gestural as I want, and I know he can pick that up. Whereas like if I were giving that to somebody who wasn't quite familiar with how to ink me, they might go in and make a bunch of little tic-tac lines instead of going whoosh, like I know Andy will.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Somebody else might, and like the way I render, sometimes I'll fill a black. Like I don't know how much black I want there, and I'll start filling it in. And like if you're an inker that's not familiar with my stuff, you see those marks and you're like, oh, those marks look like fun. I'll do that. And that's not what I meant. That was just me judging where to stop making blacks.
Right.
And Andy knows that my approach is very flat and very graphic. And but he does like inject texture into it where I don't. That is as welcome. So I need that from him.
You know, I love looking at the pencils and the inks in such close distance to each other. And maybe, Phil, we don't have to do a 101 tonight, but maybe explain to some people who've never really seen a pencil page where all the X's mean.
Yeah, that means solid black. Like I said before, I'll render a lot of solid black just to see how far I want a shadow to go, or where I want light, where there sort of be that terminator between light and dark. And sometimes I can't see that until I actually fill it in and draw it.
Yeah.
So I will render it in certain places, but then other places I know I can make X, or I can make XWS, which means black with stars or black with snow.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, like sometimes I'll tell him to like fog something up, or, you know, or tell him to like put like a Klaus Janson smog on the city, whatever, you know, and he knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And he'll follow that up.
So good.
So we're on the same page. And thankfully, Eric Gapster, who I've been working with for about 10 years, which is 10 years ago, was the first time Andy retired from inking. And like, it didn't take, but like, and I was like, oh, I need a new inker. And thankfully, Eric is local, and I could sort of train him up to get on the same page. And his line is definitely more delicate than Andy's, and comes more from his own cartooning style, which is definitely more sensitive and less. It's less Dick Giordano and more. I don't want to say Terry Austin, but it's definitely more like he himself as a cartoonist is definitely more Watterson-like.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have that continuity and associates DNA that Andy does. So he's a little more, like I said, he refines my work a little more than Andy does, and Andy beefs up my work a little more than Eric does.
I love it. All right, let's move on to some other images. But I would be remiss if I didn't share this from our buddy Mark, who just says, "Hanging out with you guys is equivalent to a master class in cartooning and comic panel design." Thank you so much, Mark.
So true, Mark.
So you can Venmo us at Pencil to Pitch.
The tuition.
You can buy this podcast as an NFT after the.
That's right.
Oh, so this crazy page. This is I just came off like a sort of a mini arc of Justice League, and it almost killed me. And this is a good example of why. we drew this double page spread. It was like this huge sprawling battle scene, and there were so many characters and so many like some obscure characters, because I dropped them in there, that I felt like I had to make a key for the color's sake, just so they could go through and see who all these wild characters were. So I just thought it would be fun to show people like behind the scenes of that Justice League double page spread that just came out.
Wow, that's fantastic. I'll ask a layman's question.
Sure.
Phil, I usually take on that role here at Pencil to Pencil. How long does a page? Oh wow, this is a spread.
That one was brutal.
Yeah, tell me about how many ass chair hours you put into this one.
Quite a bit, because for one thing, it was just like, it was fun to do it, and also Bendis, who wrote this script, also gave me free reign to do stuff. So he was like, listen, the point of this story is that there's these dimensional portals in the Fortress of Solitude that have opened up, and all these characters from different dimensions and different Justice Leagues and different Earths can all be on this panel at once. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put Ambush Bug in it. I'm going to put Metamorpho in it, because those are the characters I care about. And so it was a chance for me to trot. I don't have the other spread on there, but I put Ragman on another one just because it was like fun for me to trot out all of my favorite characters. But I also realized that for normal colorists at DC, a lot of them have never seen or heard of these characters before.
Right.
So I had to make this little key for them.
Right. And I would go ahead.
It was like 2.5 days of work, probably.
Wow.
Yeah. But a normal page, like if I'm doing my job, if I'm like disciplined, a normal page is like 6 hours.
Matt Warenko asked another question. Phil, do you do underdrawings and lightbox them, or do you draw straight on the boards?
I used to. I still do thumbnails. I thumbnail every page that I draw. And I used to want to capture the gesture so much that I would blow up that thumbnail and then lightbox it onto the page. But I found that was killing the drawing even more than just looking at the thumbnail and redrawing it. So looking at the thumbnail and making big moves with my, I still use non-photo blue. So like I make big kind of sweeping moves with my non-photo blue. I kind of draw from the shoulder in the layout stage instead of from the elbow or the wrist. Like you have to. When you're penciling, it's all down in your wrist. But one good thing I got from art school is that like you get better gestures in your figures from drawing from your shoulder. Yeah. So like when I do the layout, I try to keep it up in my shoulder. But I will say this. I also change the way I work all the time. Like, because sometimes I'll say, oh, how could I have ever drawn with an F-lead? What a fool I was. And then like 2 weeks later go, where have F-LEDs been my whole life? And sometimes just the shift in how you work is enough to sort of like reinvigorate you and get you re-engaged with your work. So nothing's ever like hard and fast in my system of working.
Phil, we have a question that I was holding. I put it in my pocket just for occasion like this. Our new buddy Sarah Serio Art says, when you get the story, do you draw in order page 1 to the end, or do you skip around? I always like that question.
Yeah, I lay out the book in order, but I don't draw it in order, because I don't know if Mike feels this way or Jamar, if you feel this way.
I jump all over the place.
Yeah, but some days you wake up and you're like, I am not up for that page. Like, today's page is going to be, the character flying over the Arctic, just because I need a break. I need a break today. And then some days, and of course, the result of that is your last week on a book is all the hardest pages.
Right.
Yeah, that's something I learned, I guess, right away, was that if you draw, and again, this relates to people being young, if you're excited about certain things and not excited about certain things, and if you draw the things you're excited about, then you really do it's like all bricklaying at the end. And so I draw in order, but I ink out of order because pages get wet.
Yes,
And,
that's true.
and Williamson used to do that. He'd have like, when he would get those JR issues in, he'd have the whole thing going. Because he said, you know, if you got a day where you kind of in the morning, well, if that's like part of one panel, you're not going to notice it like, whoa, it's not like that when you're going through the book. And
I will say that you're right about that. But what I find is that doesn't always mean the hardest pages. Like a hard page can be an engaging, fun page to do.
But it has horses.
Yeah. What I wind up with in the last week are the boring pages, because I kept like putting, even if they're quote unquote easier pages, they're hard to get your butt in the chair for.
Yeah.
And so you wind up with those at the end. But so maybe that's the way it's supposed to work, because like you really gotta like bring your best effort to like the pages that are the most important in the story. But that's just the reality of the situation, like the reality of deadlines.
I always wonder if it was different. I mean, I heard that Kirby just like, put the cigar in his mouth, put the piece of paper on his desk, Galactus,
starts
all the way through, right?
Yeah, starts in one corner, ends in the other.
Yeah. I know that, Al kind of jumped around because he also was doing like reference, but we were talking about this earlier, like reference intensive stuff.
Yeah.
Like if this was like all guys in World War I gear.
Oh God.
Right? Okay. Now that's just going to be a lot of hard sitting down and drawing. And there are certain guys who that would be like their mother's milk to them. They would just love to do that.
Yeah.
But I think mostly from guys of like our generation, there's not a lot of guys that like to draw war stuff. In fact, all the guys that we grew up with, they would much prefer to draw the war stuff than the superhero stuff. They would much prefer to draw cowboys and horses and stuff like that. So
very much so. But that's because they grew up reading strips and we grew up reading them.
Right.
But I think to go back to Kirby, what you're talking about, I really do think he drew that way, because sometimes you'll find like a story of his, they end at very like arbitrary moments sometimes, and he'll find a way to build up to that ending like on that page. But like, and then sometimes he'll do a page that you would think, oh well, like if Kirby were really showing off, this would be a 4-panel page, but Kirby knows he's running out of real estate, so it's an 8-panel page, because I think he just starts and ends, and it's all instinctual with him. His instincts are God level, but it's instinctual.
I heard an funny story that when Gene Colan would work with a plot, that sometimes he'd get stuck because he would do those big open things in the beginning, and then towards the end it's like, oh, he's got to cram the whole thing at the end. He's like, so there would be more little things at the end, because I mean, most fans don't realize if you were working Marvel style, depending on the guy you were working for, especially if it was Stan, you get maybe a paragraph.
Oh yeah,
conversation, and it's really up to you.
In fact, I mean, I don't want to downplay what Stan did, because Stan did a lot of writing when the pages came in.
Right. Yeah.
But I tried to buy at auction a Stan Lee typewritten plot summary, and it was like 6 issues of Thor, FF, and I can't remember what else, but Thor and FF for sure. And each issue was a scant paragraph, not a big paragraph, a scant paragraph. I'm like, there's a joke that he would call Gene Colan on the phone and be like, "Daredevil fights an ape, go." And Gene's like, okay.
All right, you want an ape in a hole?
Yeah.
All right, let's turn the page here. All right, I don't think there's an ink behind this one, Phil.
No, that's just it's one of the more fun pages I had with Justice League, and also like kind of the perils of Justice League, and that this was not a big combat page, but there were still like 1 million figures on this page, And it was sort of the challenge and the reward of working on Justice League at the same time. Also, I really like to draw Superman. My Superman is very much a cartoon Superman, but I really like drawing Superman because he's got those sort of. I think I described in an interview once that he's like drawing like a parade balloon, or like a '57 Chevy. Like it's like bulky yet streamlined and kind of powerful but still weightless. He's all these like really incredible things for a cartoonist to play with. And he's clean cut, but he's, he still can be intense. So those are all, and Mike knows from working on the show, I had a cup of coffee on the show on the Superman show, but still that informed a great deal of how I approached Superman.
Yeah, I loved working on that show. I really felt like that sort of married everything I liked about the character into one.
Yeah.
To one, and I don't think it's been equaled yet. I know they keep trying to make him into Batman, but he's just not Batman. Yeah. I know that seems to be a thing where that's just my little peeve with the DC movies. It's like the DC movies want to make every character, it feels to me like the same, and the Marvel movies make the characters different.
Yeah.
And I think because they're different, you don't feel like every movie, even though there's a sameness to a degree, you don't feel like, well, wait a minute, didn't I already see this one? And I don't find myself ever laughing in a DC movie, which,
right.
I think that's the other thing, So I think Superman is like joy, and even Batman is joy because he was a detective. He was a detective, but he wasn't sour all the time.
Yeah, there's a great Frank Miller quote about Batman, and people blame Frank for Batman being dour all the time. But Frank has this point that like Batman is Batman because he likes it. It's fun to be Batman. It's cool to be Batman. And you can see more of that spilling out into all his Dark Knight sequels. They start to get weirder and wackier, and his Batman starts to get, less literal. But like there's an element of fun in all these characters. And I think the great thing Marvel does is they put so much into casting. Yeah. They let the personalities of those actors like dictate a lot of where those films are going to go. And it's a really kind of seamless production.
So do you have, like in my head, when I draw a character, if I draw Captain America or I draw the Hulk, it's almost like I have the character living in my head, which is kind of like if I draw Captain America, I do have that voice from the cartoon in my head, right? Still somehow, or even like the voice of the Hulk from that old cartoon was such a cool, old voice. But
I don't think I hear him, but I definitely start making their faces when I'm drawing them. Like if I'm drawing like the demon, I'll sort of start like transforming into just because I'm like in that, like you say, in that headspace of that character, and I'll just start subtly making those expressions while I'm drawing.
And I wonder if Kirby did that. If Kirby's like, the demon, while he's smoking his cigar.
Yeah, who knows? He was just like, brr, brr. He's like this ATM that prints comics.
All right, let's turn a page. Let's see what's next. Oh, this is a two for Phil. You want to tell us?
Okay. So this is a process thing. And I think if you go back one.
Go back?
Yeah, go back one more. Oh wait, maybe it's not there.
Oh, you
go ahead one more.
Like this?
Oh, I must have not included it. Anyway, I had a thumbnail attached for that cover.
Oh, okay.
But here's the pencils for this is a cover for Family Tree, which is sort of like stylistically for me, sort of straddled that line between those kind of like really itchy indie comics I made at the beginning of my career and sort of the traditional superhero career I have now. So like it has to be conventional in some respect because it's a conventional narrative, but the actual rendering itself is a little more on that rough hewn side of things. And if you go ahead to the inks, you can see where Eric is really good at like keeping pace with me in terms of not trying to correct me. like like other inkers would have an impulse to like fix things and smooth things out. But when the style itself is intentionally rough, you can't do that. Like you can, the best thing to do if you're inking something like that is to to be in the same rhythms that I'm in and make the marks the same way. And then that will be more true to the original drawing than fixing everything.
Well,
Like,
sort of like Infantino. When people would ink Infantino, you had like Joe Giella or guys who would like smooth, or Murphy Anderson would really smooth them out. So it was not like his poses, but it just looked like that sort of like generic C.
Yeah. Going back to Al Williamson, like you were talking about. So like when JR draws something, Al can draw it better. Technically can draw like a tree better than John can. But Al knows to be true to the drawing, you have to pick up what JR is laying down. And from making JR yourself. Like what JR's drawing is a comic page, and it has a language all its own that's not necessarily reflected in reality, because comic pages are better than reality. And Al knew that, even though Al's personal style was to be illustrative and realistic, he understood the assignment, and a good inker will pick up what's important about somebody's work and accentuate that without dragging it down. Even if you have, like sometimes an inker will get an assignment to go counter to what the penciler is trying to do. Like with Carmine you were talking about. I'm sure they were trying to normalize Carmine for a modern audience, which is a mistake to you and me, but not to people looking at sales charts.
Well, his stuff, especially, I have some Xeroxes of stuff that he did in the 70s, and it is pretty bizarre looking.
Yes, it's weird.
Stuff. It is very weird. And it would actually be very hard, I think, to ink his stuff because it is so, like, there's like 10 lines for it. It looked like everything looked like the flash was vibrating.
Yeah, they were shaking. Yeah. So I think that's something that's really tough for inkers, and it's especially as like there are less and less inkers. It's a tough discipline to hone, but I think Eric has got it, and I feel as comfortable with Eric as I did with Andy.
Yeah. I also think that I would encourage you to continue to try to ink your stuff, because you will find out that you will have at some point, I think you would find that there would be a breakthrough where you would pencil less and finish the drawing in the ink.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Which is what the Europeans do. They don't pencil their stuff like we do. It looks like a Xerox,
Right.
They don't work that way.
Yeah, I don't trust myself that much. Maybe in another 30 years.
What about inking on a Cintiq? Have you ever tried that?
Oh no.
You're strict traditional. You don't do any digital.
Yeah, I have to get into trouble with all my drawings and sort of work my way out of them for them to be engaging for me. Mm-hmm. So I have to lose a drawing at some point to get it back, and not being able to undo kind of helps me stay that way.
That's actually, I think that's an important thing that you're pointing out here, especially for younger artists. We think that erasing is a mistake, and therefore it's a negative thing, and therefore, you try not to erase. And then you hear people like John Buscema go, "Well, I'm not paid to erase." You hear things like that, right? Right. But actually, one of the things that I got out of going to art school was actually the ability to be even more brutal about something and completely erase it. Even if you liked it, just erase it.
Yeah, and this is to know when something's not working, and like when I don't want to be Mr. Self-deprecation, but there's like to me, like the finished product of what I do would not be as interesting if you didn't see the struggle on the page. Like you have to be engaged with like the way I draw. Like I have to get into trouble. I have to solve a problem. And that compromise that comes out of that on the page is more interesting to me than if I had those guys that have the artograph projector in their heads, and then they just start drawing whatever's in their head. That's not me. I don't see anything before I start drawing. I don't see anything.
So the page is like clay until you put your hand and you start squishing it around.
Yeah, I have to get in there and get dirty. And it's the same thing in art school. Same thing when I do fine art. I don't know where it's going until I'm into it. And sometimes I'm lost. And being lost and finding your way out is like the fun of it. And I hope it's the fun of it for the viewer as well as for me.
That's very, that's a really interesting point, because I think one of the things that I learned, again, by going back to art school, after having a career, and you got to hit deadlines, and, you're using the artograph, all the commercial art techniques, is learning to be able to abandon that gives you actually more freedom to use it or to not use it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you find something through the process of allowing yourself to make mistakes, which is actually hard on a deadline.
Yes.
That's hard.
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah.
Right. You can't, if you're John Buscema and you can draw 5 pages a day, you could smoke 3 of them. Right. You know what I mean? Because tomorrow you make it up. Right. But most guys, it seems to me now, struggle to do a page a day.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Well, and also the older you get, the more real life responsibilities you have that sort of eat into your day. Like when you're 20, you could hole up in your room and draw for 48 hours. And you can't do that after you have like an outside job or a mortgage payment or children or any of those sort of things, relationships, a parent that you have to take care of. All those things start to eat into your day, and it's not, you're not 22 anymore.
Yeah, peeing in a bottle isn't the same when you have a family.
Day's coming out. Everybody's getting a steak. I'll see you next week.
I have a question from Eternitine Forever, one of our penciliers. Eternitine asks, it's a kind of like a statement question. I grew up on Kurt Swan soups. He was always drawn lighthearted looking in expression. Do the writers today tell you how the overall emotional expression of the characters need to be?
That's a good question. I think ideally you would get that from reading the script. You would get their intent from reading the script. But then also, like if you're a writer that really knows their business, like Bendis, like the page we just showed, it's a page where Superman is angry. But he was like, he's angry, but he's not glowing red eyes angry. Like we don't need to see that all the time. Like Superman gonna fry somebody. Like the what you should get from this panel is that Superman is disappointed in you. Not that he's gonna tear your family in half.
I'm not mad. I'm disappointed. That's
yeah. Right. And it's sort of like comic artists are like so geared to like push everything to the extremes that they overdo their acting sometimes that way. And like, so you'd get like another artist might draw Superman like with his mouth open screaming and like radiating light, and like that's not what the story calls for here. So like not everything is about your guitar solo. Sometimes you just have to play rhythm, right?
I love it.
And so, and ideally a good writer can like guide you in that way and say, look, here's, you'll be tempted here to go ape. Don't go ape here. You can go ape next page, and Bendis is good at that. And I think that I worked with Philip Johnson on the other 2 Superman issues I drew. And he was really good doing that with the mood. Like the whole time I was reading those scripts, I was like, Superman is a dad in this comic. He's a super dad. He's not like, a frustrated warrior. He's the guy you can trust. And like, so sometimes your dad gets mad at you. He's not going to kick you through a window. I mean, like at least I did. At least I did.
Speak for yourself, Phil.
And then I could also project like what kind of dad I want to be on that situation, and draw on that. So Yeah, ideally it comes from the actual, just the way the script is written.
Another question.
It's up to you too to look for, to put yourself and look for acting, like you were talking about it earlier, like body language. Also, ideally, the writer would write for you different than they would write for me, different than they would write for Garcia Lopez, different than they would write for Jack Kirby.
I think so, and I think most people that have been around a while, most writers that have been around a while are hip to that. Of course, there's situations where you're brought into a job late or you're helping somebody out. That's all different. But usually when you're teaming up with somebody, like I just got a new assignment at DC that I can't talk about yet, but the writers sought me out because of what they saw in my work on earlier assignments. And hopefully we'll play into each other's strengths on that job because of that.
Phil, another question while we're still on this page. D. Brad, who's turning into the MVP of this episode. D. Brad has got lots of bodies on this episode. Phil, what kind of pencils do you draw with? I
use an F lead, and I lay things out with a general non-photo blue.
Are you going to pull? Hold on, I'm going to give you the there you go.
The general non-photo blue.
General's pencils?
Yeah, it's a general.
Okay.
Or Statler, I guess. They used to be general. They used to be generals, but they're Statler. And then I will do my actual rendering with one of two pencils. If it is dry out or dry in my studio, and I want my lead to feel wetter, I know it's really deep in the weeds. I will use one of these Mitsubishi F leads.
Okay.
And those are they're Fs, but they're smooth like Bs. But they're not smudgy like Bs. So that's why I use that F. And then if it's humid out, I'll use a Mars Lumograph F.
Oh, the Mars, nice.
And the Mars Lumograph F is a little bit drier than the Mitsubishi F. And then sometimes when I'm laying out, I know this is crazy, but probably the last 5 years or so, I've been using these giant kindergartner pencils from Faber-Castell, but they make some I
have one of those.
Yeah, they make some really good soft lead pencils like this. And they're really great for gesture drawing, and also they keep your hand from getting beat up.
Mm-hmm.
So if your hand is really tired, you don't have to grip these like crazy. And so I'll do cover comps with this. And it's also quite dark, so I don't even have to ink like a cover thumbnail. I can just pencil with this, and it's dark enough that it'll reproduce. And I get
you never use the color erase?
Only when desperate, because I think they're too chalky for me, especially in the blue. Especially in
the red.
Oh yeah, I have not. I just stick with these. But like I said, that all changes. Like a year from now, I might be using a lead pointer. I don't know. But usually F lead is sort of my sweet spot.
Phil, also, D. Brad asks, "Yo, what's that in the background? What's that animation cell in the background?"
This? It's a Toth Space Angel.
Nice
key that Dean Phillips, the guy that owns Krypton Comics in Omaha, bought for me as a gift for doing appearances at his store.
I love it. D. Brad, all your dreams came true tonight, bro.
We haven't on your other major love, which is collecting comic art.
Yeah. I have to blame you for that a little bit. I mean, I was doing it a little bit before I came to your studio, and then I saw the stuff in your collection, and then also I started to make money in comics.
That's the key.
Yeah. And so I will never forget, the first big thing I ever bought was a Frank Miller Daredevil page, which at the time was $400.
And that was a lot back then, right?
Oh, it was. But it was from my favorite issue of Daredevil. And I took a Swamp Thing check, and I took that Swamp Thing check and I went and bought that page with it. And also I would do this thing where like if I did a convention and I did really, really well at that convention, I would sort of like turn my money I made at the convention into art money.
You go over to Albert Moy's desk and go, here you go.
Yeah, one time I was taking sketch orders because I really wanted a Kriegstein EC page, and I was taking sketch orders, and I was like, I got to get to 1,000 this weekend.
I love it. Got the itch. Phil, David asks, how does your original art collection inspire your own artwork?
Yeah, thanks, David. That's a great question. And David was part of the team along with Tim Benson that helped me put together the new WRETCH collection that's out there.
Oh,
so
great.
I know who David is.
It's beautiful.
But David, I try to learn from all the art that I buy. And so I like to get art that's that has a lot of process still visible in it so I can see how things are built. And there's less and less of that today, especially with people working digitally. But I love seeing like a Joe Kubert Frankenstein page, like not a page of Frankenstein, but like it's all built from body parts, like he'll slap a Xerox on it and then he'll white it all out and draw on top of that. Then he'll scotch tape something else on top of that. And it's just, I love to see like somebody's thought process, especially somebody like Joe, who for Joe, the art piece is the comic book. It's not the page.
Mm-hmm.
It's
the
a
comic
printed
book.
piece. Yeah, it's a printed page. Yeah.
Yeah. So he'll do whatever it takes to get to that. Whereas like the exact opposite of Hal Foster, where it's like everything this is the solemn page that I'm creating. And I have examples of his work in my collection too, because I want to be exposed to all these different ways of working and see if anything in those can inform the way I work. Especially, so I especially love to collect roughs. In fact,
Yes.
I have a Kurtzman EC story that's all in one piece of typing paper.
Wow.
The General Grant autobiography, if you remember that story, and one of his Flash Gordon roughs that he handed off to Dan Barry. Right. And it's just really like invigorating to see people's like build something from the ground up. And that's sort of, like I said before, that's my wheelhouse anyway. So I do love to collect. Like I have like 1 million Buscema roughs. I have 1 million Frank Thorne roughs. I just love to see the way those guys construct pages from the ground up.
You used to be able to get those things for like nothing. In fact, when I used to buy some Buscema stuff from this guy, Al's or Nicky, I think his name was, he sometimes would stuff in extra Buscema roughs in the package.
I bought my Buscema roughs for $5 a page.
Yeah.
I bought a Gil Kane rough for $2.
Yep.
That's insanity.
Yeah.
Now those you'll see those Buscema roughs on Heritage going for $200 a pop now,
or more,
yeah.
Or even more. Yeah, I was the same way. I bought stuff as soon as I could start buying stuff to learn from. So I would buy an off page that was inked by Klaus just to study.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what that is. That's a pen. That's a brush.
Yeah.
That's a kind of pen, whatever. So a lot of
that's a toothbrush. Yeah. All that stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of my collection in the beginning was buying to learn the craft. Like I have a whole Wally Wood story that has all of his tracing paper roughs.
Oh, neat.
Finished stuff.
That's awesome.
It was from one of those House of Secret things. And then I have like some of his earlier stuff. I have a couple different Kubert pages from different times, but like you, yeah, I would buy to study the craft because, if we had lived back 20, 30 years earlier, you could have maybe apprenticed to some guy.
Yeah. Or at least visit their studio.
Right.
Yeah. And so, when I spent that time with Al, and even before I was in the studio all the time, one of the things I loved to do was to go and visit because he had just like gobs of stuff. So you would be looking at his stuff. You'd be looking at Raymond. You'd be looking at Foster. You'd be looking at Salinas. You'd be looking at George Evans. I remember he had this one beautiful, I can't remember what it was from, but it was like a drawing of a Chinese junk. It was just amazing craftsmanship. And you're right, that era kind of is gone, because even stuff that we're doing now is not, it's not of the same quality.
Right.
One, because we're working way smaller, and there is a certain verve to the line that you get when you're working twice up.
Yeah. I will say that like I still buy art for that reason, but it has expanded from looking at old masters that I admire to looking at younger artists that don't necessarily work a way I would want to work.
Mm-hmm.
But I still want to see what they're doing. I still want to see the angle they found into making comics, because that can be invigorating. Like I love James Heron of Modern People. He's fantastic. I own like 5 or 6 James Heron pages because he's and Daniel Warren Johnson's the same way. They're bringing some of that movement in from manga into American comics, but still keeping things like a lot of times manga is very like objective, like you're removed from the action. You're an observer. You're definitely an observer. Whereas the beautiful thing about American comics, at least especially in the Kirby tradition, they're very subjective. Like you are a combatant in a Kirby page. You're not watching it, you're in it.
Right.
And I think what's beautiful about Daniel and James both is that they bring that sort of spectacle for manga, but they apply it to that sort of subjective viewpoint of an American cartoonist. And it makes their stuff really exciting. And then also I love to see the work of like all the great cartoonists that are coming out of like the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is sort of on the opposite end of the technical skill level of people coming out of SVA or Qbert, that are all people that are really like technically really adept at comics. And you'll see somebody coming out from the Center for Cartoon Studies, and their drawing is sometimes very rudimentary. But those people were trained in communicating. Mm-hmm. And so you see a different level of cartooning from those people, even if they can't necessarily like draw a phone as well as like somebody that came out of the Qbert school.
The voice is different.
Yeah, the voice is different. And so like I love to see originals from all this wide range of people, and also seeing like how much like technical virtuosity matters to somebody or doesn't matter to somebody, and how that like doesn't necessarily have any play into how effective they are as storytellers. Yeah. Which I think is really exciting, because I sort of feel that I'm from that Qbert school of like the artwork is the comic. Like I'm not from like, you know, like Jerry Ordway, like the page is the art, you know, it's like beautiful, it's perfect, it's pristine. I just bought an Ordway inked page, and it's like it came from another planet. You know, it's so clean. Like there's no evidence of struggle. Whereas opposed, like I said, if you see a Frank Thorne page or Joe Kubert page, it's like ruthless. Like whatever he had to do to make that page got done, you know.
Our buddy JRD had another question. Let me caught me with my pants.
What I always liked about you know, I love those old Frank Thorne Mighty Samson comics. It looks like he was inking that stuff with like a garden trowel or something. You know?
He was.
They're beautiful storytelling.
But he doesn't dink. He's like Qbert plus. Like I have a Tomahawk page he has, and a Sonya page, and the Sonya page has a little more care into it, but the Tomahawk page, I don't think he penciled. I think he just started inking the Tomahawk page, and it's perfect. Like it's super clear storytelling, like great acting, all this stuff, but he definitely did it in 45 minutes.
It looks like he inked all those things with like a speedball number 6 round or something, you know,
or a brush that was just super loaded, and like when it ran out, hopefully he could get to the bottom of the page before it ran out.
Phil, JRD asks, who has debuted in the past few years that you think most evokes the classic comic masters?
Boy, that's tough, because like you have to really go back to like a guy like Mark Schultz to see somebody that can hang with those guys, you know, in terms of just like pure illustrative chops. I don't know. Those tend to not be, like I said, I'm more excited by people that are like sort of looking forward or synthesizing things. Eric Powell probably, I guess, would be the best answer there, because he's,
Mm-hmm.
to me, he can, I mean, like, his understanding of value is super high, like off the charts. Like, I bought an original of his just to see how he handles wash, because I'm terrible at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised to see that he's just using 2 washes, a light wash and a dark wash.
Mm-hmm.
But when he's done with a page, it looks like a 3D model of a page.
Right.
Because he's just so finely attuned to like tones and values in a page, even in black and white. So I would say probably him, and then also
I like Chris Samney's stuff. I mean, he's very kind of Toth.
Yeah, very Toth. Like, that's a cool thing now, is like when I wanted to be Toth, that was verboten.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's cool. Now it's cool to be that way. And there's a lot of really exciting kind of people in that sort of Toth school.
You wanted to be Toth in the 90s. No.
No good. No bueno.
So like Kirby in the 80s, like, no.
Yeah, not allowed. But now it's kind of come around, and people are really open to that. And there's a lot of really cool artists working in that vibe. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I don't want to discount people now. There's people I could definitely hang with, those old masters. It's just that the aesthetic is different now, so they're drawing for that different aesthetic. But
also, a lot of really talented people now don't go into comics. They go into animation. They go into games.
Or they,
comics back in the day was like, you couldn't get a strip, so you could do comics. You couldn't do illustration, so you did comics.
Right.
Now there's a lot of, games pulls probably 90% of the artists are going into games or going into animation. There's way more women in animation now than when I started in '96. I mean, there's tons of women. Where you see more women in comics is in doing the webtoons and the manga. There's a ton of young women doing that, or the kidlit.
Yeah, the graphic novel scene is really like rife with really great women cartoonists now, and that's where a lot of the stuff I collect now is in terms of people like that. So, like Zoe Thorogood or Emma Hunziker or people like that just like don't necessarily draw the way I want to draw. Kate Beaton is another. I mean, Kate Beaton is probably, I think, the funniest cartoonist alive right now.
Mm-hmm.
But her drawing is not she's not going to blow. She's not going to draw like Frank Rosetta. She's going to draw in a way that communicates the story she wants to tell, and they're perfect for that.
Oops, sorry about that. Phil, our new buddy Green Lantern. What up, Green Lantern 2814? Says, really like that Green Arrow print shown earlier. Will you have prints at Planet Comic-Con this year, Phil?
Yes, we will. If there's a Planet Comic-Con this year, we will be there. If we're not on like Omega Wave COVID by then, yes, we will be at Planet Comic-Con with that print.
The Soylent Green Omicron.
Yeah. They move through the convention hall with one of those bulldozers, just scoop people out.
You know what?
They start playing that Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. Everybody gets to lay down on top of their table.
Phil, do you want to show any more art, or you want to? Good?
No, I'm good. No, I'll do it. It's your show. We'll do what I think you got to almost everything I sent you.
Yeah, well, there's one sequence that I'd like to show, and then you can talk about that. Then we can
sure.
be done. All right, let me put this back on screen.
Oh yeah,
you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is where, like, for me, this is where the joy of comics comes in. This is a thumbnail for a page I wrote and drew of The Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, to me, it's the joy of, like, this is actually the second thumbnail. The first thumbnail I do is very rudimentary. That would make sense to nobody. Mm-hmm. It's just like chicken scratching on a piece of paper. And then I start to coalesce what the actual page will look like. And I thought this was a good example of a way of integrating like negative spaces into a drawing and moving backgrounds from one panel into the next panel so that they kind of cascade down into each other seamlessly. Mm-hmm. And it was just, to me, it was a really satisfying, a satisfying result of playing with all those different aspects of a page at once. And then that's the page as it was once Andy was done inking.
No. Go back one more. Okay. What's wrong with why? If you blew that up and it was just a little tighter, what's wrong with that?
It would the little bit tighter is my problem.
Mm-hmm.
I get too tight,
Mm-hmm.
and Andy knows, like when I've over rendered something or like nailed something down too much, to be a little bit briefer with it or more gestural with it, or to do a little more Dick Giordano on it. Like have his like pen just like razor right through something, like really fly across it. Whereas I don't. I'm so still stuck in this thumbnail. Like I'm pointing at it, like people can see what I'm pointing at.
You're like stabbing at the screen.
So listen, kids. So like, to me, I'm still so hung up on keeping what I loved about the thumbnail alive that I don't think I can make the sacrifices that an inker of Andy's caliber can make when they're looking at the same drawing.
Like even if you worked at it small, even if you didn't.
Oh yeah, that's very small. No, there's a pencil stage in between, but I couldn't find it.
So no, but I mean, what if you inked it small?
Oh, it's possible. It might work, but at a certain point, and listen, this is therapist stuff. It's not comics roundtable stuff, but like why I need to let go of a page at a certain point and let somebody else take the wheel. And a lot of it has to do with just like my time. Like I would rather be, like I said earlier in the interview, if I had Harvey Kurtzman's job, I would be happy as a clam, just like writing and laying stories out and giving them to people. And to me, like every minute I spent finishing a page, not that it's beneath me. It's like something that like I don't quote feel qualified to do as well as Andy or Eric do, but also it's time I could be spent writing. And like that, I don't know if you feel this way, Mike, but the older I get, the harder it is to hack. Like when I was young, I was just so excited to, like I said before, just excited to be on stage. So like you could fly through something, you're like, I'm making comics, just like throw it on the pile, more comics. And now I don't feel that way. Like everything starts to, I mean, it's a trap for everything to become a manifesto. You wind up like Toth not doing anything, not every page can be emblematic of your entire career. But as you get older, you start to have that impulse. Like, how does this page represent me? And sort of,
how many do I have left to do? And
right.
How am I going to balance that out?
Right. And I don't want to get frozen into that sort of like, how like when a band will come out and like everything on their first album is a banger because they're not thinking about it. And then by their fifth album, there's usually one song that's like the apotheosis of their work. Like it's the best example of their work. And then the rest of it's kind of a mess. You don't really, and I don't want to get trapped into trying to make that like the ultimate Phil Hester page. But as you get older, that impulse, it's like gravity. It's really pulls at you. And I think letting go of stuff and letting other people ink my work is a way to like kind of abrogate that responsibility a little bit. And it frees me up to keep moving forward.
Well, I think you're making an intellectual choice of how to trade your time, which I think is good because, I know a lot of people like Buscema or Kane or guys of that generation, their value to the company was doing exactly what you're talking about doing. Yeah. And if Buscema could have inked all those Conans, he would have made a lot less money. He would have drawn a lot less comic books and told a lot less stories. And so I know a lot of times people get into these war room chats like, no, that guy's the best inker and this guy ruined this thing. And it's like those guys all had choices and they also had different choices. Yeah. And fortunately, you're in a position that you can make that choice.
Yeah, it's a good place to be, I have to admit. But there's a little bit of I don't know. Like I said, it's a therapy issue. Like there's a little bit of a cop out in there for me not inking my stuff. There's also that idea that I have to like to keep it fresh and to keep it real, I have to keep moving. And maybe that means like never inking, or I think if you go down further in the images, there's an image or two that I inked
hold on
for
a second.
Sketches. But like
the dark side piece?
Yeah, the dark side is one that
all right, hold on. Let me get it up there for you. Hold on one second.
But like, as you can see, it's something that's like super highly stylized. Like I can't, those are the pencils for it.
Right.
And as you can see, Micah, this is a little bit like looser than I would pencil for somebody else.
Right.
Like you were talking about. But you see, it's like super high contrast and super stylized. And especially when we were coming up, you couldn't draw Batman that way. You probably can now, but when we were coming up, you couldn't. And so,
well, now, one of the benefits that people have now is that almost all styles can now exist at
yes.
In the 90s, it was like if you weren't put the little sawtooth and lemon seeds on people's faces, then that wasn't working,
I never heard that lemon seed.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah,
right?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And, you would get these subtle hints from editors about things. And comics is Jean-Marc used to always say, comic books always wants to be first to be second.
Yeah.
Everybody wants, if something over there was the lemon seeds was selling books, everybody's got to make
right.
Herb Trimpe's got to make lemon seeds. You know
Herb
what I mean?
Trimpe's got to draw like Mark Pasella. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't now that nothing is selling, everything can exist,
I think there's also an aspect of it that a lot of today's editors and publishers don't have technical training in comics. So they're not as hidebound by like what they came up doing. Like, like they're great editors in those days and they all made comics, but they also had an idea of how comics had to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And now people entering comics in the editorial class are people that experience comics as a reader, and for the most part, not just American comics. So they have a much broader aesthetic of what they're willing to accept in mainstream comics, which is all good to me. And I really wish that would have happened 15 years earlier, but I'm cool with it happening now. I'm not going to begrudge people that can join in that now.
A lot of the people coming in now, if you were to say John Byrne, X-Men, that would have been like us reading, a comic book in the, like Black Hawk in 1945.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, I've heard about it. I never read it. I think I saw something on the internet about it, but
yeah, like I think somebody the other day said they'd never seen a Lee Weeks Daredevil, and I was like, "What's wrong with you?"
What?
But it's just a sort of like what you come up. It's like, like you said, it would be like expecting 10-year-old me to know who Bruno Premiani was.
Right. He makes the pizza.
All right, you guys. I'm gonna put a pin in this. Phil, you're a fantastic guest. Everybody who watches this show every week knows what I'm going to say next. Where'd the time go?
Yes. Well, it was very enjoyable, and it did fly by. And you guys are great interviewers, and it was great to catch up with both of you.
You're a great interviewee. I mean, a lot of people, the hardest thing and the most interesting thing for me is talking to people like you guys who love the process, who love the medium. But a lot of people do, but they can't. They
articulate
can't.
It. Yeah.
No. That was one of the things I often say that was frustrating about Al, because Al could not, in some ways, articulate like this. He was not.
Yeah.
He could draw. He could do it. If you watched him,
he was like a cat. Like a cat cannot explain why it's graceful. It just does it.
Yeah. And so it's very interesting, also to see what technology now will do with this next generation that's coming up now.
Yeah.
With all the digital and all that stuff,
I'm ready for it, because like seems like whatever it is, it's always exciting. At least comics has that thing cornered, where like it's such a low barrier to produce comics that people take all sorts of crazy chances with them and have all sorts of fun with them that they can't, even in animation where there's a bigger budget. Like in comics, there's nothing between you and your comic. So people they throw caution to the wind, and that's what to me makes it kind of, it'll always, no matter how mainstream those movies get or those toys get, comics will always have that little core of punk to them that makes them exciting to me.
There was one person, AA, who was in the chat who asked a question, and I promised them I get it on, and I ADHD'd, and I don't remember what it was, so maybe they'll throw it back up real quick. So we'll do a little soft shoe until that comes up. But Phil, you have a lot of agents in the chat that keep saying, "Don't forget to plug the Facebook page."
It's the same guy. It's all yeah. So go to, like, he does a really good job of, like, I'm not a very good self promoter, so he does a good job of, like, putting old work up there and, like, letting people know my appearances and what new work I have coming out. So, like, even though I'm not on Facebook, if you are on Facebook, you can check out my fan page and get everything you need to know about me. And also,
how do you feel about that? Because I mean, we talk about that too. I mean, today, one of the things I do is every day I wave my flag with something, because the companies are not going to ever wave my flag.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like the sort of more personal interaction that you get on Twitter with people. That's more one-on-one conversation and less like a declaration that you make on, like, I'm not posting this to my wall. I'm just saying this to somebody that asked me a question, which is cool. So, and also, Facebook's weird, it's just weird.
Enough said. Oh, here it is. AA asks, "Yo, Phil, when we getting a new a how-to book from you? We need that."
I don't know. I would love to teach, though. I actually love giving portfolio reviews. And I do workshops for young creators at high schools and colleges in the area. And I really find that rewarding. And like, if the opportunity presented itself to teach comics on some level, I think I would enjoy that. But for now, I just sort of have to keep it one-on-one in the context of portfolio reviews for the most part.
I feel you. Oh, and also we have a guest appearance from our man Art Baltazar, who says, Art. "Oh yeah, man, you're a good man, Phil Hester."
That's what that means. Okay, yeah. I'll take that. Thanks, Art.
I know Art speak. Yeah,
Art's also great.
You're a good man, sir. Very cool. All right, you guys, thanks so much. And also, Phil, you want to give a shout out to your Twitter account?
Oh yeah, I'm just at Phil Hester on Twitter, and I'm pretty active on there, and my DMs are open if you have, like, a specific question you want to ask me.
And you can go to your page on Comic Art Fans, right? And see jillion things, right?
You can see I think I'm at about 500 pieces right now.
Wow.
So you could check out my collection.
All Don Martin.
What?
All Don Martin.
No, there's no Don Martin, but there's like maybe 3 Phil Hesters in there, but the rest is all people I collect.
That's fantastic.
There's Phil, Mike Manley in there.
Oh, you have a Manley page.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks so much, Phil. I hope that we can have you back again. You're a spectacular guest, and hopefully you didn't fill your apple juice bottle during this episode.
No, I didn't. I held it the whole time. So I appreciate it, though. This is probably the best podcast I've ever been on. So
thank you. Please shout that from the mountaintop. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and and in the after it's probably too soon to be back on again, but after this coming fall, I have a really big project coming out that
we'll have you on.
All right.
I love it. All right, we're gonna do our sign out. Phil, you got to do it with us.
What do I do?
You'll find out. All you guys, thanks so much. God willing, we'll be back here next week with another fantastic guest, or maybe it'll just be me and Mike just chopping it up. So for Mike Manley, our disembodied head, Brett Blevins, who smiles down upon us.
Where is he?
He's in the cloud.
I was promised a Brett Blevins.
And for our fantastic guest, Phil Hester, you guys have a great night. All right, Phil, so we're going to do. And don't forget to wash those Kirby hands.
Yes.
Get those Kirby hands. Oh, that's a good one.
All right.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good one. See you next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.